gentlemen, welcome to the Evangelist Nick Garrett channel. Thank you for making Jasher, the Book of the Righteous One, such a success. The full 3-part series is now on a playlist on our channel. If you're new, please subscribe. Today, 10 Christians not one of us could live without. Protestants and Catholics have 1,500 years of shared history prior to the Protestant Reformation. The split occurred in the early 1500s. So the church history is Protestant too. Most historical narratives about the Reformation begin in the 1300s with John Wycliffe speaking out against the Pope. But what about the 1,300 years before John Wycliffe? Now, some efforts have been made to fill in the gaps. A modern documentary produced by John Doerr called A Lamp in the Dark, The Untold History of the Bible, tried to fill in this 1,300 years of missing narrative while trying to steer completely clear of contributions by Roman Catholicism. The narrative seemed to seek out separatist groups throughout history that had their own customs and biblical translations that could be presented as forebears of the Reformers. While it is a good documentary, its narrative poses all kinds of problems. For example, the documentary tries to tie Protestants to the Albigensian sect, which was a strange amalgamation of New Age occultism, Gnosticism, and a mix of Christian ideas that existed in 13th century France. The documentary also tried to link Protestantism to a northern Italian sect called the Boudoir. Separatist Christians that claimed their tradition went all the way back to the Apostle Paul. They were later made famous by Peter Waldo and became known as the Waldensians. As one can predict, these groups had been victimized by Rome. Popes had hunted them down, and because each had the true version of the Holy Scriptures, and the Catholics wanted to keep their power. The issue with this is that this isn't our shared history. Further, for the Protestants to claim sola scriptura and then claim some lineage to the Romant Bible of the Waldensians is a major contradiction. So what I've done is I've put together a list of 10 Christians that no one could live without. Not Catholics, not evangelicals, and especially not Protestants. This list will make some happy, it will make some uncomfortable, and it will make some angry. But please temper your emotions. I'm trying to help. I'm trying to do what I was called to do. I'm trying to share the truth with you, and sometimes truth-first Christianity is uncomfortable. More importantly, I'm trying to help Protestants regain characters from our shared heritage that we should all celebrate. It's not a bad thing to all sit down at the table and try to strengthen the unity of Christianity. No, hardliners, I'm not saying we return to Rome. I'm saying that sitting at the table and getting some things straight is a good thing before it's too late. So, here it is. Top 10 Christians that not one of us could live without. Number 1, Ignatius of Antioch, also known as Ignatius Theophorus. He was never a Catholic. He lived at least 2 centuries before the Roman state church ever existed. He died sometime between 108 and 140 AD. He was the 3rd bishop of Antioch after the Apostle Peter and another early Christian named Evodius held that post for just a little while. He was a very important documentarian of early church teachings. He wrote 7 famous letters about ecclesiology, sacraments, and the role of bishops. He and his homeboy Polycarp were pupils of John the Apostle. His story tells us 2 things about Christianity during that early time. Christians were full of zeal, they spoke about Jesus on threat of death, and were willingly persecuted via martyrdom. Normally, persecutions were local events, but Ignatius was summoned all the way to Rome for his. Making the most of it, he sent letters ahead to the towns they would pass on their way to Rome. He'd then stop and talk with those that came out as he passed by, and he would preach. His bravery, the early date of his letters, and his lasting impact make him number one on the list for all Christians to remember. Number 2, Eusebius of Nicomedia. Not Eusebius of Caesarea, Eusebius of Nicomedia. We'll talk about that another time. I've got a series of videos on it. He was the author of the Ecclesiastical History of the Church. It was written between the 320s and the 340s AD. He was not a Catholic. Too early for that still. Look, we would know nothing about Constantine, the church of the time, the narrative view of the church councils if it were not for him. He was a member of Constantine's court after the capital moved and had direct first-hand access to serious historical events. Eusebius recorded Constantine's great deeds, his failings, and his life as a Christian. He also captures Christianity pretty well, what it was, which relevant arguments and debates he should document. He himself was an Arian. Whoa. Not the kind we think of 20th century Germany. No. An Arian is what we would call a non-Trinitarian today, or a modalist. It was named after a presbyter from Palestine named Arius. Eusebius was detail-oriented in his documenting of the Council of Nicaea, sharing all sides and preserving them for posterity. Number 3 on the list, Socrates of Constantinople, aka Socrates Scholasticus. He put forward an excellent Historia Ecclesia that covered events up through the early 400s. It's a greatly cleaned up history from that one of Eusebius. It offers a more unbiased version of the church history than Eusebius had been able to do. And more importantly, because of a little-known academic subject about biography called prosopography, historians are able to gain a ton of information about Constantinople in his work. As an interesting aside, much is made to say the Catholic Church began via the Council of Nicaea, but the 2 first primary historians of the events were from the East, Constantinople, and Nicomedia in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. Just something to think about when we hear the arguments about the perceived dominance of the church in the West and this platitude about 2,000 years of unbroken history. Not being critical, it's just more than that. Number 4, Athanasius of Alexandria has to be on this list. Well known to have been a dark-skinned African, contrary to his portrayal in later 15th century Italian Renaissance art, he wrote the most important and lasting and impactful work on the Trinity ever to have existed. If you haven't read it, you need to. So important was his work that if it were not for him, our view of God the Son today would state that God the Father is one, and that Jesus the Son, while divine, while resurrected, while truly Lord, was a unique creation of God. Not with him from the beginning. This was the prevailing view of Christians before the Council of Nicaea. At Nicaea, Athanasius won, arguing for the Orthodox Trinity. Yet immediately after the council, the view reversed back to the oneness modalism of Jesus as a special creation. Athanasius spent the rest of his life arguing this, being exiled, arrested, criticized, and torn down fighting for what we know as the Orthodox Trinity today. But he did get the last word. When Christianity rose to prominence in the West again, centuries after the fall of Rome, it was Athanasius' view of the Trinity that formed the foundation for Christian Europe and Asia. Just listen to this passage from Historia Arianorum, written in 358 AD. How many excused themselves who had accused him falsely? How many who formerly hated him now shewed affection for him? How many of those who had written against him recanted their assertions? Many also who had sided with the Arians, Arius the presbyter from Alexandria, not through choice but by necessity, came by night and excused themselves. These men appeared bodily on their side, yet in their hearts they held communion with Athanasius. That's from volume 4 of Athanasius' Selected Works and Letters. Number 5, Benedict of Nursia. He has to be on this list too. Also not a Catholic. Rome had fallen by this time. He's literally the inventor of monasticism. He invented it by necessity. If there are no monasteries, there are no monks. If there are no monks, there are no writings. Throughout our important church history, there would also not be any empirical evidence documented about Christian practices and how far one can take them when the sounds of the world are removed in a monastery. After Rome fell, Benedict had the sense to go around and pick up all the burnt pieces of the church and preserve them in a monastery for posterity. It must be clearly understood that the church after the fall of Rome was dead in the West, gone. Maybe some sectarian groups thrived in certain places, but the church went from being a part of the bureaucratic structure of the state, well-funded, well-sponsored, to ashes. Number 6, Justinian, the emperor from the East. He has to be on this list. When Rome fell, he was the stronghold of Christianity until Charles the Hammer Martel stabilized Europe several hundred years later. So much is made of how the Western Latin Catholic Church has made supremacy claims for housing the authentic church. It's hard to see that in history. Truthfully, Justinian and his wife Theodora strengthened what was left in the East and transformed Rome and ashes into the Byzantine Empire. While Benedict was saving records in the West, Justinian was creating the stable structure needed to have at least a form of Christianity thrive. How are you liking the list so far? If you're digging it, please subscribe, like, dislike, comment, give me something. Because number 7 on the list, the Martels of Europe. If it weren't for them, Europe's transition to Islam would have happened over 1,000 years ago. Look at Europe today, and let me say that again. If it weren't for the Martels, Europe's transition to Islam would have happened over 1,000 years ago. In 732 AD, at the Battle of Tours, Robert Baratheon with his warhammer, for my Game of Thrones friends out there, Charles the Hammer Martel, stopped the Muslim advance near the border of France for a long time. Europe could finally breathe relief and settle, build, establish commerce, grow food, and prosper. The Battle of Tours represented the conclusion, for the first time, Muslim advancing that had been taking place since the 630s AD. Muslims had taken and renamed Spain and Western Europe and sat on the doorstep to France. In the East, they were even closer to what we know today as Turkey. All the cities settled by Christians during the first 300 years of Christianity had become Muslim. Feeling safe under Martel leadership, Europe began to thrive. Charles the Hammer and the Latin Catholic Church were the only two power brokers in Europe, and at times butted heads, and at other times worked together. Martel's grandson Charlemagne watched with great interest. When he became ruler, he devised a way to increase his own power, Europe's power, and to gain the support of the church. This plan was a win-win because it would make the church powerful too. Because unlike most who rule, Charlemagne and Pope Leo III did work out power-sharing arrangements which allowed Christianity to continue to thrive. The Western Church at the time had picked up some states and had taxing and protection structures, yet by conceding to Charlemagne and his military prowess, and by Charlemagne conceding to the 150 years of restructuring by the Latin Church in the West, it was a win-win and good politics. The Pope had a hammer to keep the papal states in line with Charlemagne, and Charlemagne had support for his crown and secular leadership from the church. Together they ruled Europe, the Pope from the background. Either way, if this doesn't happen, we have no Christianity, and that's why they're number 7 on the list. Now, my Protestant friends, you have to take a Catholic on the list. Na boo boo. Pope Urban II. It's the 1090s AD. Pope Urban II established the entire Crusades program from his office. For the first time, Christians adopted a concept that existed since day one in Islam, a holy war. Muslims had done it for 400 years before Christians even considered it. At that time, the church in the West and East did not really get along, but the emperor in the East, Alexios Komnenos, had a problem. From Constantinople, when he looked across the body of water there called the Bosporus into Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, he could literally see the Seljuk Turks preparing to attack them. So he sent emissaries to Pope Urban II for help. At that time, the church didn't have a military mechanism in the West, unless they could talk a secular leader into going along with what they wanted. How could Urban help them? Well, he developed this concept of restoring Christian lands, ideas, and supremacy, relieving the suffering of Christians around the world at the time from subjugation and slavery under Islam. So Urban takes all of his notes. He and his staff put everything together. He rides for France to this Council of Clermont. And here's his speech. Military service for spiritual benefits. God would be pleased if you save fellow Christians and restore Christian land. Now, for those that might say, God would not condone violence. Okay, so you're admitting Islam is a false religion? That's all they did for the first 400 years they existed. Are you saying that invaded peoples cannot defend themselves? So he developed this idea of the suffering servant. Christians would take up the cross and they would go to Constantinople and help our Eastern brothers and sisters throw back the Muslims. The ultimate prize of this endeavor, Jerusalem, would be returned to the Christians. The individual warriors are forgiven of their sins, and they were successful. Most don't know that there were 9 Holy Land Crusades over about 200 years, while the later Crusades were debacles, with a few nods to good expansion of global trade and interdependency around the Eastern Mediterranean. During the early Crusades, Christians took back every single city that had been taken by Islam during the previous 400 years. Without Pope Urban II, this just doesn't happen. And the idea of evangelical patriotism today cannot therefore exist. Number 9, one more Catholic, and you're gonna gasp. Pope Innocent III. I will concede he was in some ways notorious, but hear me out. He led a local crusade against the Albigensians and killed at least 8,000 to 60,000 people. Not a great guy. Yet, the church grew in influence during his watch. Franciscans were established. He had the sense to bring them into the church. The Dominicans were established. He had a sense to bring them into the church. He convened church councils to establish the specific supernatural status of sacraments in Christianity. The 4th and 5th Crusade happened on his watch, both debacles. But he succeeds in getting power to flow back to the Western Church from the East. So while it's cringe, he has to be on the list because he begins a period of renaissance in the church. Number 10 on the list, we have a tie. Awesome, we have a tie for number 10. The first number 10, 10A, John Wycliffe. The morning star of the Reformation in modern parlance might be what we call today the very first whistleblower. I'm totally not kidding. This dude was totally brutal in his condemnation of what the church was becoming. He was a Catholic priest, but had had enough of what he felt was the average everyday people being kept in the dark about learning their faith. Each town had one Bible in their church, if they were lucky. But John Wycliffe thought priests should be allowed to teach lay people and to question the clergy. About 2 centuries before the printing press, there were not Bibles in every home. Wycliffe translated the Bible into a common form of English and began teaching people. He spoke out against the Pope for their attempts to stop him. They kicked him out of the priesthood for his work. But he began being followed by a group of Christians who shared his view, and they came to be called Lollards. It was said during the time of John Wycliffe that if one were to pass two gentlemen on the street, one would be a Lollard. That's a terrible accent. They wouldn't have sounded that way. But the church, now with a military mechanism to its power thanks to the Crusades, went around England killing Lollards and burning Wycliffe's teachings. By the end, Wycliffe was so hated for rejecting transubstantiation and papal authority that the Catholics actually performed a ceremony called Bell, Book, and Candle, burned him, and spread his ashes in the river with the hopes that he would go to hell. His gravest sin was having said, quote, "We should listen to no man unless he speak the word of God. If any man of earth, either angel from heaven, teacheth us contrary to the holy writ, we should flee from him as from the foul fiend of hell, and hold us steadfastly to the truth and freedom of the holy gospel of Jesus Christ." That was his sin. And that is why he is number 10 on our list. Now, who could be so spectacular that they would tie John Wycliffe for number 10? William Tyndale was born in 1494 in England, just on the doorstep of the Protestant Reformation. By college, he just wanted to learn Greek. Simple guy, Catholic priest. He left Oxford University and went to Cambridge because he didn't like that they strictly taught Latin at Oxford. First world problems, right? While the evidence is lacking, tradition says that Erasmus himself taught Tyndale. Imagine that. With his Greek knowledge solidified, he ended up feeling that Latin was inadequate to teach people the truth of the gospel. He developed an overwhelming passion to teach common people the gospel in English. So devoted to this idea was Father Tyndale, yes, he was a Catholic, that at a fancy dinner attended by the powerful Catholic Cardinal Wolsey, Tyndale kept correcting the cardinal to his face about all the details he was getting wrong from Scripture. A big no-no back then. Wolsey was embarrassed and angry, doubled down and stated, "I will remind my eager friend that the word of the Pope is authority, and I am courtier to King Henry VIII. Well, Tyndale began to see sinister motives at play in the way the word of God was seemingly spoon-fed and lorded over the everyday people. Since the time of Pope Innocent III, it had been church rules that a commoner could not own or read a Bible. Inspired by what Martin Luther was doing over in Germany, William Tyndale took his message public. Another great whistleblower who was pivotal in Christianity, being well established in the English language, Tyndale stood up against the canon and secular law that could see him put to death for teaching, quote, that it was impossible to establish the lay people in any truth except ye scriptures were plainly laid out before their eyes in their mother tongue, end quote. After his reputation and life's work to that point were destroyed by his noble mission, he retired to a place called Old Sodbury Manor and set out to translate the Holy Bible into English. He also wrote public letters that stoked the fire a little bit more. He said, quote, "I oppose the Pope and all his laws. If God spare my life, I will cause the boy that driveth the plow to know more of the scriptures than thou dost." Whew, Tyndale doesn't play. Needless to say, that got William Tyndale arrested. He was held at Castle Vilvoord, where he continued to write. Over time, the translations of Scripture experienced an ever-improving progression of detail, but Tyndale had the most lasting influence. Most of us never consider just how hard it is to take something in one language like Hebrew, retain its divinity, its intent, but put it in a memorable language that people enjoy, they like to say, they can remember it. We owe so much to William Tyndale for this. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Am I my brother's keeper? These are all William Tyndale. When Tyndale was hung and burned alive, he is recorded in Fox's Book of Martyrs as having screamed out, "Lord, open the King of England's eyes." Within years, it would eventually happen. There's our list of 10. I've got one dishonorable mention for you, and you are going to scratch your head when I tell you why I put this guy on the list, but you got to hear about him for good reason. The dishonorable mention goes to Alessandro Farnese, Pope Paul III. This dude had literally held most inner circle advisory papal offices by the time he became pope. Farnese was the link that brought the papacy from the Renaissance era into the post-Reformation era. He had been de facto mayor of 2 cities. He was in the College of Cardinals from a young age. What I mean to say is that he got into the College of Cardinals when powerful families bought their way into it. So how can he be on this list then? He sounds so wicked. He was even papal treasurer for Rodrigo Borgia. He was one of the contemporaries of Niccolo Machiavelli. That's who he had in mind when he wrote The Prince, Farnese and Cesare Borgia. But look, he came through the Renaissance papacy, the totally corrupted institution of the late 1400s and early 1500s. He watched the Reformation go down through Europe and decimate the Catholic Church into nothing. Then, almost 2 decades after the beginning of the Protestant Reformation, this dude then became Pope himself. He convened the Councils of Trent that literally met for 18 straight years to fix their broken church, the very criticisms that the reformers had leveled upon them. The first 4 years of Trent under his leadership. Pope Paul III should be given some props because the church and all her libraries and our important ancient records housed in the Vatican were not burned down by reformers because God saw fit to have Christianity grow on 2 branches instead. His response was to revamp and assert and reassert what Catholicism believes so people could choose. So today the discussion goes on. We are many parts, but all one body. We live in a post-Christian country. We need unity more than ever. If we can accomplish unity without compromising truth, we should aim for it. Return to Rome? No, that will never happen. Continue on the path of Protestantism today? Fragments, egos, rampant subjectivism leading to denomination after denomination. We can't do that either. I don't have the answers, and attack me if you want. I'm used to it, but we need new ideas and a new way forward. Hopefully this list helps some of us to reclaim our history, open our books, and take some pride in the events of our great faith and share it with others. Ladies and gentlemen, as we close, I want to share a few things with you. If you're enjoying this portrait behind me, it is Salvador Dali's interpretation of The Last Supper. You're going to get 2 videos this week. On Wednesday, I don't know if you're a Game of Thrones fan, but I was. And the outpouring online about how terrible the 8th season was just palpable. But I thought a lot about it, and I'm going to do a video talking about why I think season 8 of Game of Thrones isn't some mistake by George Martin or some mistake by Dan and Dave. It is precisely telling the story of our time and its moral relativism and how in the end the tough questions sometimes can't be answered. And then on Sunday, I like to view current events through the lens of times in history when the same things happen. So I'm going to tell you about Frederick II, the Holy Roman Emperor, and his Sicilian kingdom, a time when they tried multiculturalism and diversity, and I want to share with you what happened. Join the channel by membership. You can become a crusader, an archbishop, or a deacon. It's a small monthly fee, and it allows you small perks, such as seeing the videos before they're released to the public. We have 2 new Teespring products. One is a t-shirt that says, "May your work today bear fruit," which is usually what I end every video with. And I got masks made that say, "Cover your face, sinner." Right? Because to me, we're all born inherently wicked. There's a question about this disease and we have to cover our faces. There's just so many theological ramifications to this. We're hiding our shame. So I love that mask idea. We have our PayPal. This is the easiest way to support me, where it comes straight to me and I can use it right away. You can purchase my books online, amazon.com/author/Nicholas Garrett. Across the platforms this week, on my website, you'll be able to read the paper, Top 10 Christians Not One of Us Could Live Without, on Monday or Tuesday. You'll already find Prophecy and Jasher up on the website on the homepage. Scroll partway down, you'll see Theological Positions, and you can download it. If not, tab on the left, go down to Theological Positions, and you can read it right on the site there. On TikTok, I'm going to be making some funny videos with my dad where it's Wisdom of My Father. On Instagram this week, I'll be sharing a few cool ideas as I come across them. On Facebook, I'm going to continue putting forward some of my position papers with several Christian groups I belong to and debating them. I'll share anything interesting that happens with you. And I'm actually working out Twitter finally. So I'll let you know how that goes. Twitter's great because you just get to say like a short thing. You know, it's 140 characters. You got to think carefully about what you're putting there. Anyway, guys, I love you all very much. Thank you for watching. If you're not subscribed and you're watching this far, there is no reason why you shouldn't be. Like, dislike, comment. Any activity helps with the algorithms, okay? Also, this is a video I would really like to see shared. If you wouldn't mind doing that, share it with your friends across all the platforms. Otherwise, friends, I will see you next time. God bless you. Happy Sunday. And may your work today bear fruit. Thanks.